Is up, everybody? James Jackson here, back again with another video. If you're new to my channel, I do tips and tricks for the filmmaking industry. So if you like the content here, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to stay up to date on all the content going forth. Okay, this is going to be a very, well, I don't know if it's going to be controversial. I think it's going to be because this is probably one of the most talked about, most popular feature out right now, and that is IBIS. And this discussion I'm going to have is because IBIS is the thing that everybody's going for, and it's the subject that everybody's always demanding, is saying this is the wave of the future, and and even somebody in Canon who has never done an IBIS camera is saying now they're going to be putting all their mirrorless cameras and putting IBIS. And it's a feature, and it's a feature that's talked about. And in this discussion, as someone who's owned the Panasonic Lumix GH5, who has shot with the Sony A7 III for many weddings, A7S2, the and I've also did my test with the S1H. I'm sort of looking at it as well. This discussion I want to ask is IBIS kind of overrated? And let me preference this whole discussion. This whole discussion in two things. One, in no way is this video in reference to stills or photography. Yes, even myself knows that in terms of photography, IBIS is probably one of the most important features that has came out in the past couple years. Simply because of how much it affects your ability to, stop up or stop down on your shutter speed, that to help you get the image that you're looking for. So in photography sense, yes, IBIS is very important. So if you are a hybrid shooter, someone who does just as much as photography as much as video work, then yes, IBIS is something that you definitely should be looking at. So I hear that. The second thing is, yes, I know a ton of vloggers also look at IBIS for the simple fact that it keeps the whole thing down to a minimum. They don't need to carry as much equipment because they can sort of get a nice sort of stabilized image using IBIS. However, even with the vlogging, I sort of have a discussion I want to talk about, but the point I want to sort of get, this discussion is mainly for purely video shooters. So purely video shooters, people who are not a mixture of both photography and videos, but people who are pure video shooters who get paid for doing video production and film production, because this is a film and video production channel. This video is going to be tailored around, is IBIS really valuable in terms of paid video productions or any sort of paid video work? If you're doing work to make a career out, if you're doing video work to make a career out of it, yes, you can make a career out of vlogging. A lot of people have. But this is sort of more in terms of a production level discussion, that is IBIS really is really that big of a factor in terms of video. And the reason why I asked this is because I went to Togo just a year ago. A year ago, I was in Togo, West Africa, with my wife, celebrating with her side of the family the holidays. And I took the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K, and well, I brought two lenses, but really for the majority of that time period, I only used one lens, and that was a Olympus 12 to 100 millimeter f4 lens. Beautiful, great lens. I've raved about this lens. I've talked about this lens. If you haven't, I've seen my top 5 favorite, or my favorite lenses to use with the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. I did that video a while ago, but check it out. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. But the thing about it is that video sort of basically I did the whole thing handheld, as you're seeing right now. I did the whole video handheld in the car. Handheld. There's no post work on this. It's just that IS lens. That is the only thing that's doing all the work of the footage that you're basically seeing right now. So it's having that camera that didn't have any in-body image stabilization at all. All the stabilization was relying solely on the lens. It sort of made me wonder, well, how important is IBIS if you can, if you have a good lens, can you get most of those shots? So I basically, when I had the Panasonic S1H, I did a series of tests. I did one set of tests against the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, 6K with a Canon 24 to 105 millimeter f4. And then I did another set of tests with the Pocket 4K with that Olympus 12 to 100 millimeter f4 lens. So I kind of want to discuss that, show you and give you these examples to sort of see basically how with these videos, you know, how does IBIS compare? If you have, and by the way, with the Panasonic S1H, I use their 24 to 105 millimeter f4 lens. So I'm taking full advantage of the IBIS and the dual IS that is built into that camera. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first set of tests. And by the way, there is no post work, there's no post stabilization done on anything. And all of these shots are me holding the camera. There's no tripod, no monopod, it's all handheld. So let's take a look at the first test, which is basically, oh, sorry, that is not it. Give me. Which is basically the, a steady test. So if you look here, it's essentially, so first we got the Panasonic S1H. And as you can see, you know, it's doing really well. Again, this is all handheld. It's just the IBIS and the lens IS, no post stabilization. So, you know, just holding it just to see how it goes. But let's look at the Pocket Camera 6K. And as you can see, it's doing just equally as well with just a lens IS, with the Canon 24 105 f4 IS lens, just the lens image stabilization, doing just as well as the the S1H. So for me, it's sort of like, okay, so that's that test. And, you know, lens image stabilization tests is for if you're doing steady shots are really well. So let's crank it up a little bit more and let's see how it is with some panning and some tilting. So this next test is me taking a shot. If you see with the S1H, I pan down and then I move over. And as you can see with the IBIS, again, IBIS and lens IS, it's actually really well, really smooth. And I'll give it to that. I'll give the Panasonic credit. It's a nice, smooth shot, really nice, especially if you're doing like weddings and stuff, and you want to sort of do a sort of dynamic movement. It's great. Now let's look at the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera 6K with just the lens IS. And as you can see, the lens IS is actually pretty well. Now it is jittery. I will say this, it's definitely, the S1H performed definitely better, but it's not that much better. You know, throw some warp stabilization in and, you know, you got pretty much really equal results. So yes, in those situations, IBIS is better. But as you can see, it's not that much better than just having a lens IS. But hey, okay, that's the lens. I wanted to see now what would happen if you took the IBIS, not the IBIS, I'm sorry, the lens image stabilization off. Because one of the benefits, the things that everybody talks about is, well, that's because you're using a lens IS on the Pocket 6K. Well, what if you didn't have a lens? Okay, yeah, we all know it would be terrible. But what happens if you take the stabilization of the lens off and you just use the IBIS? And let's compare that with using a lens IS. And this is where things kind of get interesting. And as you see here, this is the IBIS only. We're only using the IBIS of the camera. There's no lens IS. So as you can see, it's definitely not as smooth. But, you know, it's still pretty decent. But look at the Pocket 6K. Yeah, it's kind of a little bit slower. But once, you know, calm down, you do some nice small movement, and you do some controls, you can totally see that it's actually smoother than using the IBIS. So, and that was the thing about me. It's like, this is the part that blew me away. Is that the IBIS is, yes, it's smooth, but with just only the lens IS, the Pocket Cinema Camera 6K is doing better than the Panasonic S1H. Now, there's other factors into this, and I want to sort of get to that, and I'll get to that sort of at the end. But To me, weight distribution is a big deal, is a big thing regarding stabilization, regardless if it's IBIS or non-IBIS with just lens. Weight distribution, how you're distributing the weight of the camera, is a big factor into image stabilization. The more weight you can sort of balance and everything else out, the easier it is to stabilize. The thing with the S1H, it's very heavy, and then with that 24 to 105 lens, it's also a heavy lens, and it's very front heavy. It's very, so the balance of holding it's kind of off, and I will perfectly say that this may be just simply user error. It may be user error on my part, and that may be true. But I will also say that's the same thing with the Pocket 6K, because I was using the 24-105. That lens is definitely, it's not as heavy as Panasonic's 24-105, but it's still it's not a light lens, and you definitely feel the imbalance of the 6K with that lens. But you see the results. IBIS alone, compared to the lens, just using lens on the Pocket 6K, was not doing better. Again, it could be user error on my part, but this was something that I repeatedly saw. Even when I owned the GH5, this was something that I repeatedly saw in terms of IBIS. So and this is the thing with a lot of cameras that have IBIS built in and have sort of a dual IS systems. They're really designed to basically mean you got to work with those cameras that work with dual IS. But that also means you're sort of limited with your options in terms of what sort of lenses you use, because you have to use the brand's native lenses. So that which to me kind of defeats the purpose of IBIS. If we have to use lens stabilization to get the best image stabilization out of the camera, it kind of defeats the purpose of IBIS, when it's one of the features that everybody talks about with IBIS is that you can use any lens. And even if I had a prime, I still had this same result. I go back to the GH5. It's the same. I had the same result. Even using a prime, you still were not getting as smooth shots with it compared to just having a good lens. And in this situation, having a camera that's not necessarily has non-IBIS and just going with a camera that has lens image stabilization, or just going with a camera and just using lens image stabilization, seems at this point, in terms of IBIS with no lens and lens stabilization with no IBIS, IBIS with no lens stabilization compared to lens stabilization with no IBIS, that seems to be the better option, because with the IBIS, you have to rely on the brand lenses with image stabilization. Compared to just using you just need a lens that has good image stabilization, and there's a plethora of those. So there is sort of more options in that regard. Me personally, that there's more options in that regard. And then finally, I wanted to just actually do some movement shots. Now this one, I didn't use the Pocket Cinema Camera 6K. I actually used the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K against the Panasonic S1H. Again, that one doesn't have image stabilization built in. It's just using lens stabilization. This shot is both, whereas the S1H is using both IBIS and lens stabilization. So let's take a look. And as you see here, look, I'm not saying that IBIS is, again, I'm not saying that IBIS is bad. But if you look at these two shots, the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K is doing really, really well. And this is the point I wanted to talk about, balance of weight. The Olympus 12-105, the Olympus 12-100 that we're using on the Pocket 4K is much more balanced and it's much more balanced of a camera. And you will see that it's much easier to create image stabilization out of the Pocket 4K. And even though, yes, the S1H is doing a good job, the Pocket 4K is just doing just as good of a job in terms of image stabilization. Now, you'll see some shake here. That's because we had to step on some stones. There's an uneven path there. But as you're seeing right here, the Pocket 4K is doing really, really well in terms of its stabilization. Again, there's no IBIS at all in this camera. So take a look again. This is, again, the S1H. You see here, it's doing really well. It's doing nice. It's doing decent well. But so is the Pocket 4K. Nice, smooth, nice little smooth actions. And this is amazing. And this shot amazed me. Is that just how smooth the Pocket 4K is in doing stabilization. Again, this part I will say is definitely my fault because again, this was an uneven terrain and that part, but still, you can see right here. And I'm not doing any stabilization in post. All I'm doing is every one of them is just me hand holding the camera. And as you can see, I would say the Pocket 4K is doing just as well. In some shots, it's doing just as well, if not better. Again, this is my results. I know you can see it for yourself. And for me, it's just that it's just to me there's so much better investments in terms of stabilization than IBIS. You got something like, let me pull this up real quick. This monopod right here. This is an amazing monopod. The iFootage Cobra 2. Amazing monopod. I wanted to do a review of this monopod, but I would just tell you to go see Gerald Undone's video if you haven't seen it. He'll do a better job than I could ever do about explaining why this monopod is awesome. Put this monopod with a lens, a good stabilized lens, and you got super smooth, crazy shots. It's super, and this thing is really light. You can easily compact this and travel anywhere if you wanted to. So something like that. And the other thing is, look, as good as IBIS is, it's not, and yeah, you saw on the test a lot of times, yeah, it is better than lens stabilization alone, and I do agree with that. But it's not that much better, and you need lens stabilization itself in order to make it better than just having lens stabilization. But even then, it's still nowhere near, in terms of stabilization, as good as using some sort of stabilizer like a gimbal or a Steadicam. Those are still the better options in terms of getting the most stabilized shots. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, well, vloggers, and if you're traveling, and I get it, true. If you're traveling and you're trying to be a minimalist, but we also got to keep in mind that, gimbals are getting smaller and smaller. I mean, look at the Ronin S. The Ronin S is super light. So if you're somebody that's going to be trying to be compact, the Ronin S is a great little lens. You got the Weeble S from Zoom Crane that can take a whole bunch. That is a beast of a gimbal that can take up so much weight, but it's still super compact. You could throw it in your backpack. And those options are infinitely better than having a camera that's stabilized of an investment. They're much better investments than actually just using, getting a camera with IBIS. Yes, IBIS is good, but I have yet to see a camera that's come out whereas IBIS is so good that it replaces a gimbal, even something like a monopod. Yeah, I could get a tripod, it could be heavy, you don't want to carry that around, but something like a monopod, I still would take a monopod over having a camera with IBIS if it means I can, and I would rather invest in a camera that gives me better features, like if it's, the image quality, low light, autofocus. Those are features to me that are far more important than a camera that has IBIS. And then finally, the final thing that really makes me sort of question the value of IBIS in terms of video, is the fact that I have a lot of friends who have cameras that have IBIS. I have a lot of them. A lot of them shoot weddings. A lot of them do travel videos. A lot of them do corporate videos, do commercial videos, do small corporate event stuff. None of them that I know of, everyone that I talk to, none of them just simply use IBIS. They all use gimbals. They all use some steady cameras. They all use some sort of other form of stabilization than IBIS. And they all tell me this, and I always ask, well, it's like, well, this camera has IBIS. Why don't you use it? And they all say the same thing. It's not as good as these guys. Those are still better investments and investment opportunities than just getting a camera with IBIS. So, this is sort of what I wanted to present. I wanted to give you guys sort of give this idea of just sort of breaking out this habit of that IBIS, you need to have IBIS, otherwise the camera's dead. And because so many people on YouTube and so many YouTubers are coming out like, this has to have IBIS. And again, if you're a hybrid shooter, if you're a photographer, I completely understand your reasoning for wanting IBIS. Completely understand. But in terms of video, in terms of its necessity in terms of video, there are so much greater value and so much greater investments than IBIS, me personally. But maybe this is just me. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. Let me know. Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think IBIS is still, extremely important for video? I'm talking video, not hybrid shooting, not photography, purely video. Am I being crazy that I'm saying IBIS is a bit overrated? Let me know. Leave a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and also hit that subscribe button, and so you can stay up to date on everything. And until next time, take care, everyone.